afternoon, good morning, whatever you are in the world. It is a great day here in Florida where I'm at, but my guest is in another world where we are going to discuss it later on. And I will introduce her shortly. My name is Mona. If you have never met me or seen my podcast, I am intercultural trainer, consultant, coach to decision makers. Basically, the show is all about cultures as it relates to leadership, harmony in the workplace, team performance, global expansions, and everything that affects a culture in our world. And I came to realize that culture is extremely important. That's what shapes us. That's what motivates us. And that's what makes us who we are. And neglecting this part, this discipline, this huge school of thoughts and practices is a big mistake. Please help me welcome my guest all the way from Italy, Cheryl Obal. Is that correct?
Yes, it's nice to be here. Thank you so much, Mona, for inviting me.
Okay. People want to know about you. So tell us who you are.
Okay, well, I'm originally from the US. I'm a permanent resident of Italy, and I've also lived in several other countries for long periods of my life. So, for example, I lived in India for 3 years, South Korea for 2 years, Saudi Arabia for 4 years, and then I also lived in Japan, Thailand, Pakistan, and Qatar, all for around a year or less, let's say. And then I came back to Italy, and this is my permanent residence. So I'm back here after 4 years of being in Saudi Arabia recently.
Wow, so rich, so diverse, all these countries. I'm sure that you have a lot of stories to tell us and to tell your students and clients as well. Now, being an American, and I live in the United States. Well, I've been living in the United States for about 32 years, and I don't see a whole lot of people doing what you're doing. How did that came about?
Good question. I mean, actually, I kind of fell into this career by luck and by chance. And it happened when I was hired to work for Microsoft in India. Basically, they hired people who had experience in doing language training and had some cross-cultural life experience. And then they trained us to be cross-cultural trainers for the staff at Microsoft India that were working with other markets. So my team was Indian development engineers that were working with high-end US clients. And this is where I got introduced to all the methodologies for cross-cultural training. We were using Cultural Detective, Globe Smart. I learned about lots of different methodologies at that time. Although then, of course, as you know, you kind of go on and you learn more and you deepen your understanding and you have additional experiences. But that was the starting point. And I guess a turning point in my career as well.
Wow, that is a wonderful. And I think it cannot be any more enriching to have this experience and experience that you have, because you've been pretty much in all kind of cultures, different cultures from one extreme to another, and how you adapt with that is so important, right?
Absolutely. And when I first started my expat journey, it was in Japan, and I was only 21 and I had never been outside the US. And that was like my first job in another country. And, I had an amazing life-changing experience. But at that time, I didn't know there was a thing called cross-cultural training. And in fact, after Japan, I went on to live in Italy and then South Korea and then India. And it was in India that changed everything, because I got introduced to this field. And I fell into it because I had been an ESL teacher. And so they hired people that were ESL teachers and they trained us into cross-cultural trainers. So I have to be very grateful for that experience. And the other interesting thing about like most of my international jobs is that, in terms of the adjustment, you're right when you said like I had to adjust to very different countries and cultures like Japan and India and Saudi Arabia. And I think I purposely went for those countries that seemed a bit more challenging or more different from my
Mm-hmm.
culture of origin. Like I
Uh-huh.
wanted it to be really challenging because I didn't see that, for example, moving to England would be so harsh. You know, it's very similar to US culture.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted a huge challenge. And I also, interestingly, I mean, in all of my international experiences, I was not like sent by a company with a cushy relocation package. No, I found every single job experience on my own. And
Mm-hmm.
in many cases, I obtained the visa on my own and my apartment on my own. I learned the local language and I forced myself to have a full immersion experience. For me, this was the only way. Like I've seen people that have relocated from one country to another on behalf of a company somewhere else, right? And
Yes.
that company provides them with a really nice package, you know, and they take care of everything, which is great. I'm happy
Uh-huh.
for them. But you know, I've seen those same people have really big difficulties in integrating because it was something maybe, for lack of a better word, forced
Uh-huh.
on them or
Mm-hmm.
imposed on them. Of course, they also have a choice in many cases. Yes, I want to move abroad. But I think when you do it yourself
Uh-huh.
and you have to do all of those steps of setting up your own life, which is extremely challenging, you then are invested in it 100%, personally invested. Plus, you really learn about culture. You learn about the local people, how they think, how they live, etc. You start learning the language. You know, you start seeing how the society moves. And I
Yes.
think that was the most valuable part of, you know, most of my job experiences was the fact that like I found the job on my own in that country. And for example, for India, it took me 6 years to find a job that would
Oh.
hire a foreigner to come to India. Like it was my dream to work in India, but it's really hard for foreigners to get a job in India unless you're sent by a home company, you know, which I didn't have. I was, you know, I always had my own business, so I was not, you know, it was impossible to get sent by another company.
Uh-huh.
I had to find that opportunity myself. The same thing in Thailand. And I just found out about different job sites, local job sites. Like, for example, in Thailand, the job site for teachers is called Ajarn, AJARN.com. That is like Ajarn means teacher in Thai.
Uh-huh.
So I found that out somehow just by talking to people in the field. And then I searched on that website. I got the job and I, you know, all of the other things fell into place. But most of it I did kind of on my own, if that makes sense.
Wow, wow, what, what a trooper you are, first of all, and kudos to you for being curious, and I guess your curiosity and the love of knowing of others drove you to where you are today. We will have you back for India alone and to see what you learned
Okay. I
in
would
your
love to
journey.
talk about India. I would love to. India has a very, very special place in my heart. I
Uh-huh.
did a lot of things in India besides the language and cultural training. I taught dance and I worked with NGOs and I wrote my
Wow.
master's thesis on Indian human rights law. So there's a lot of rich experiences, life-changing experiences, and you know, lifelong memories and friendships I've made there.
Yeah, wow, wow. Let's get into our subject then. This is all good stuff. We were chatting earlier and we mentioned the fact that here in the United States, cultural intelligence, competence, or awareness is not so much seen as a necessity within the ongoing training in corporations and onboarding training for staff and leaders, managers, and everyone involved in any particular business venture. And you mentioned something really, really important. And I would like you, if you don't mind, I'd like you to share it because this is
Okay.
so, for me, it's so true. And also, it's so interesting that we have to be aware of it. If we don't know it and being aware that, oh, perhaps we're not incorporating this into our culture, the American cultures, because of, go ahead.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I think because of the fact that the US is such a massive country, and we are surrounded by two huge oceans. A lot of people don't travel, right? And so they're not aware of what it means to adjust to another culture, because when people come to America, the expectation is you assimilate with American values, which is correct, which is true and perfectly valid. And Americans tend to be a little bit ethnocentric, to be honest. I'm American, so I know how that all started.
Yeah.
It comes from our education. Now, ethnocentricity is normal to a certain degree for everyone, okay? Why? We identify with our culture, and it's part of who we are. So we all, to a certain extent, all over the world, we all think that our culture is the right one and the best one, to a certain extent. Okay, now, what is the main goal of cross-cultural training? It's to shed those layers of ethnocentricity, to understand that my way may not be the best way in all circumstances. Nobody is better or worse than another. No culture is right or wrong. And these are the key teachings. And this is the point that we start from, generally speaking, in cross-cultural training. It starts with sensitivity. So the sensitivity means getting rid of that ethnocentrism, that belief that, okay, this is the way we do things, and this is the way it's right, and this is how it should be done, you know, and understanding that there are other ways to do things, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Now let's figure out where we can bridge the gap and how we can meet in the middle. So in many of my, my experiences abroad, I've noticed that certain expats who've never lived abroad, and maybe they're at a certain career level, like they've been working for 30 years or something, and then suddenly they have their first assignment abroad. These are the people that sometimes struggle because they arrive with some preconceived notions, and then they start having conflicts, and then they come and complain and say to you, this is the way it's done. So I always know when people are saying, like, this is the way it's done, this kind of way of speaking, okay, it says to me, well, you're a little bit ethnocentric. That's fine. Okay. It's okay. But you have to understand that the way you think it should be done is the way it's done where you come from. And it's correct there. No problem with it. But you have to understand that things are different here because we are in a different country.
Yeah.
So there are some people that, even despite living abroad for years, don't adapt, don't assimilate, don't accept, and don't let go of this kind of this belief. This is the way it should be done, and they're not doing it right, and they're not communicating right.
Yes.
Okay, maybe they're not communicating in the way you expect.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the way they're communicating. There's not something wrong with the way you're communicating either. It's just different. Now let's figure out what we have to do about that.
Yes. Wow. I agree with you 100%. And I do remember when I came to the States, it was quite cultural shock. Although I thought I was well-versed on a lot of things about the United States from watching movies and series and programs and all of that. And then when I came the first time, I met someone, and I said, oh my gosh, he asked me, where were you from? And I said, I was born in Morocco. And he looked at me just like that. He said, what? Where the hell is that? And I said, oh, well, first of all, this is offending because for me,
the attitude about it,
know where Morocco is, because it's just part of my culture is knowing. Actually, we used to be like just within our family, we're sitting at the table for lunch or dinner. While waiting for that, my father or my brother will ask, while waiting for the food, the exercise was, where is this country located at?
Wow.
Where is the capital of this country? If it's not geography and it's not history, is math problems. So while we're sitting,
Wow.
while we're sitting, waiting for food to be served, that was a discussion, table topic, and it makes you think on your feet. And that's how we develop that love for culture, that curiosity to know about others. So when I came here, pretty much everybody that I met did not know, and sometimes did not care to know, you know?
This is very common, unfortunately. I've experienced that also in the US. It's very different here in Europe because we have so many smaller countries in a
Yes.
smaller land mass area. It's much more common that people have traveled to other countries, they
Mm-hmm.
understand other culture, and they're interested in it. They're curious about it. They want to know about it. In general, let's say that, it's more common here in Italy. I would say 7 out of 10 people are pretty keen to discuss culture. They like the topic. They've been abroad. They like hearing about cultures and learning about them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
However, having said that, I have to also say that some of the best cross-cultural training companies originated in the US. And, in certain parts of the world, talking about the awareness of what the topic is and the need for this training, and in certain parts of the world, they don't even know what cross-cultural training is. Like, for
Mm-hmm.
example, the Middle East Gulf, because I work there a lot. As you know, I lived in Saudi Arabia
Yeah.
and Qatar. But it's gaining more awareness. But just a couple of years ago, if you said cross-cultural, people had no idea what that was about.
Yeah.
So I actually had to use different terminology, different vocabulary, just to make people understand what it was. I use different words like adjustment training, relocation training, other kind. They understand diversity and inclusion because it's huge now. Like
Yeah.
diversity, inclusion, these are buzzwords that somehow got more famous and more popular faster than cross-cultural, even though cross-cultural has been around as a training topic, has been around long before diversity and inclusion as a training topic, as a popular, trending topic.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting because, but if you say diversity and inclusion, then they go, okay, yeah, like the diversity and inclusion, adjustment training, when
Yeah.
people move from one country to another, and then they go, oh, okay, okay. But I mean, if you go to most major cities in Europe and in the US,
In the US.
you're going to find cross-cultural training companies, or you're going to find people working in the cross-cultural space, even if on a larger scale the population in general isn't aware of it. You do find some of the best training methodologies originating from the UK, the US, Europe, etc. I mean, Fons Trompenaars and Geert Hofstede and Richard Lewis,
Mm-hmm.
and then, of course, we have all the US-based cross-cultural training companies. So, yeah, I would say that professionally and training-wise, it's pretty well known in Europe and the US. In other parts of the world, it needs more time and development, but that also means there's opportunities.
Yes, absolutely. Speaking about opportunities, I was almost leaving my work yesterday, and I got a text saying we're looking for cross-cultural trainer in South Florida for a delegation coming. So I said, okay. So
Wonderful.
speaking about opportunities, and going back to our subject of today, like you and I, we came to realize that understanding cultures so important when engaging with global clients or in global business environment. And today we really are global. Anywhere you go in the world, pretty much you will find a diverse ethnicities and people from all over the world, whether it's here in the United States, whether it's in Italy. It just demographics, of course, changes from one area to another, but the diversity of ethnicities is there everywhere you go, and that affects communications, relationships, decision making, how we view the world, through what lenses
Absolutely.
we view the world. And that can have a huge impact on the success of any business.
You're so
Tell us,
right.
yeah, tell us, just I'd like you to share or elaborate on this and tell our viewers, why is it important? Why is it important for every business, their leaders, their managers, their staff? I mean, just the staff to understand variations of cultures in terms of retaining talent, in terms of attracting business, in terms of keeping or helping in expanding clients base. I mean, all of that. And you've been in this field, so share that a little bit about your insight on this.
Okay, well, to answer this question, I'm going to start off with a story. It's a famous story. Maybe you've heard this story, and maybe some of our listeners have also heard this story. And it's about the American businessman who's trying to sell a product to the Japanese Japanese potential buyer. Have you heard this story?
Yes, I have. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. So as the story goes, and this is a true story, I don't remember which company it was, and maybe it's better not to say, but anyway, the businessman goes to Japan without any cross-cultural training, sits down with his potential buyer, and then they're talking and having their negotiation, and he names his price. Let's just say, to make it easy, $1 million was the first price, let's say. And of course, because of the reactive Japanese communication style, the Japanese potential buyer didn't answer straight away. He took a pause, which is common for their style. They pause, reflect, and then reply. And that's their way of giving respect to the speaker. They don't want to jump in there and answer immediately. They want to take the time, think about it, leave a gap, and then reply. Okay. So the American businessman thought, oh, well, he doesn't like my price. I better bring it down. Okay. Well, then how about 900,000? And again, the Japanese potential buyer waited, didn't reply. And so this went on and on. So the American businessman kept lowering the price and lowering the price, thinking the Japanese buyer didn't like my price. He won't buy it. Okay. So he finally got to the lowest possible offer he could make. And the Japanese businessman finally quietly agreed. But later, he found out that the Japanese buyer thought his very first price was quite reasonable and he was going to accept it. But because the American businessman didn't know the Japanese communication style, he didn't give him that time to think and then reply, they lost out on a lot of money. So, I mean, this is kind of an extreme case, but it can show you how, in negotiation, it's of utmost importance to understand the other culture, because it can cost you a lot of money. So you rightly mentioned several other important factors like relationships, communication, decision-making, leadership. The list goes on and on. So I work with companies that typically move staff from one country to another. And often what happens, the companies that know about cross-cultural training would contact me before they send the expat to another country. But sometimes they contact me after they've already sent the person abroad and that person is having problems. And in fact, I'm working with a client right now, and there's several of them actually that have sent staff abroad, that staff members having problems. And then they call me, oh my goodness, we've sent this person to this country. There's lots of problems. We don't know what to do. We need your cross-cultural training. And so sometimes I come in at a stage where emotions are already running high. There's already some conflict, and it's about, calming the person down. And the first 6 months of any expat assignment is critical. And there's a typical trajectory that, I don't know if you've seen this graph where the first 3 months is so exciting because it's like you're in a new place, everything's new to be discovered, and okay, it's interesting and fun and exciting. And then after some time, the curve goes down where you realize, okay, I'm settled in here. I understand where to find this and that, but now I'm used to it, and now it's not new and exciting anymore. And now now I realize what's really different and what I actually maybe don't like or don't feel like I can adjust to. And then you go through a slump around the 4 to 5 month, 3, 4, 5 month period. Now, at 6 months is the time when usually feelings level out in terms of your mood between high and low. You start to feel like you're back up on an even keel and you're adjusted around 6 months. It's a typical, it can be different for, from person to person, of course, but this is a kind of average time span, and this up and then down and then evening out. Okay. So in fact, I've seen in a lot of my expat assignments, or a lot of my jobs, I should say, abroad, that there were always people who left at the 6 month mark. I don't know why, but it was because of this, this adjustment thing. 6 months is somehow really critical, where this is the point where they say, okay, I like it here, I can stay, or I don't, I gotta go home. That's it, I'm leaving. So in every expat job I had, it was 6 months, you see people around you just leaving. And then if people stayed beyond that point, the tendency was that they would adjust and they would stay long term then. So in terms of sending people abroad, it's absolutely essential to have cross-cultural training. In negotiation, it's absolutely essential. Leadership as well. Leadership is very different from culture to culture. There was a really good HBR article in 2016. I think the author was Sylvia Ann Hewitt, if I'm not mistaken. And she talks about how she interviewed managers in different regions of the world. And she said that she reported that the majority of leaders in the US and the UK said that demonstrating authority and qualifications gathers respect from your team or your staff. Whereas in other parts of the world, like highly relationship-based societies like India, China, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, just to name a few. There's others, Turkey, there's a number of countries in the list. Managers in those places, the majority of those managers said that you gain respect by showing humility and empathy with your team. So you really have to know how to show empathy. What does empathy mean? In highly relationship-based societies, work is not the priority in the sense that it is for Americans, for example. I mean, we Americans take work very seriously. We don't necessarily drop everything to attend a cousin who's in the hospital or something. But in a different country like India or China or Saudi Arabia, people will drop everything to attend to a family member, even a distant relative, and they may or may not advise you in advance, because family comes first. And that's a cultural thing. We have to accept that. We have to understand it. We have to be patient, and we have to be empathetic as well. And we have to know where they need empathy, in which areas are they looking for empathy. And also how we communicate feedback is really different, and really important to know the differences from culture to culture. In America, we are direct communicators. We give direct feedback, and it can be very harsh and hurtful. You would never want to give feedback like that in a place like India or Saudi Arabia or even China and South Korea, because they don't respond well, or they don't understand, and they don't know this direct communication style. This brutally honest, direct feedback, can break a relationship. And you need to adopt a more diplomatic style of speaking. So I always talk about this in my training, like, well, okay, what's the feedback you want to give? All right, how are you going to give that same feedback in this market? How are you going to give the same feedback in this country, this country, that country? So it's often about it's the same feedback, but it's about how you deliver it. It has to do with your tone of voice. It has to do with your facial expression, It has to do with also giving some positive information in that constructive feedback, and not just jumping right to the critical comment that you want to make, but being positive and thanking them and acknowledging what they did and now acknowledging their efforts. You know, we Americans don't do that typically. We don't take the time to, you know, sugarcoat anything or think of people's feelings. We just dive right in, and that's the culture. And that can be extremely hurtful, especially if you come from another country to work in the US and you haven't been trained for that. It will shock you. I mean, it shocked me as an American and as a young person starting out in my career, the kinds of things that people said to me in meetings in front of everybody. I mean, would probably send people to dig their head in the ground, stick their head in mud. I mean, seriously, it was so painful. I can't imagine. And I'm an American, so I knew about the communication style, and still I found it so incredibly shocking that certain things were said to me out in the open in front of my peers. And as you know, if you know the reactive, I'm using the term reactive, it's Richard Lewis's term to describe the style of communication in certain parts of the world, mostly Far East Asia. This kind of communication style is not done over there. And then there's a lot of virtue given to, you know, there's a lot of praise about being able to understand without saying. You know, they have this phrase in Japanese, to read the air, to read the air. So to be able to understand from the context what people are thinking and what people are feeling, and to be able to react accordingly, and to not say certain things in such a harsh and direct way. This is such a key thing that I spend a lot of time talking about it. I've seen it countless times. An expat going to a certain part of the world where they have indirect communication or high context communication style, but they don't know anything. They haven't been trained. They don't adapt their communication style at all. They tell people off left and right. And sooner or later, nobody is talking to them. They alienate their foreign counterparts. And this is really sad, because with a little bit of prior instruction, with a little bit of guidance before leaving, they can be aware. I mean, it's not about changing who we are fundamentally. We never want to change who we are. We are who we are, and that's fine. That's perfect. You should maintain your own values, but you should also know and have the maturity and the intelligence and the professionalism to know when you should adapt to the other person.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you on what you mentioned. And one thing that worthy of mention right here is, so often people don't understand their own culture.
Yes.
Okay. So how can I understand others and I don't even understand mine? And this is so important. So if I, for example, I had done an interview or a questionnaire at a university, a local university, and I went around just asking students, what is the American culture? Simple question, right?
Really good question.
The American culture. Believe it or not, nobody knew what the American culture was. Most of students were telling me, well, it's Sunday football and beer.
Yeah.
And some students were, culture? We don't have a culture. I don't know what. So this is where problems arise, is when we don't understand our own cultures, and going out there trying to do business with others, we don't even know our own. So that's something that has to be taught in schools. Okay, well, what is it? How do you do things? Are you aware that you're doing them?
This is a really good point. I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is an essential element of any cross-cultural training. There's like this whole section on self-awareness, like, all right, let's talk about our own cultural values, which, you know, and if you think about the pyramid, the bottom level being the human nature, the fundamental, you know, foundation that is kind of common to all humankind. And then the middle part, which is the largest layer, which is the cultural part, which is shaped by different groups we belong to throughout our life, which could include our culture of origin, but can also include, you know, any kind of group you belong to, like your religion, or let's say you grew up in in a training for to be a professional artist. Like I grew up in professional dance training, so I have a lot of cultural aspects still from that whole. That was a big influence on my life. And then you have the final layer, which is the personal layer. So personality, individual differences create different personalities. So
Yeah.
absolutely. People have to understand that, yeah, I may have some values and some principles that come from my culture of origin, but even in the same pool of people from the same culture, everybody's different because everybody has their own individual influences and their own groups that they belong to throughout their lives that influence their values and principles.
Yeah.
So it's really important in any cultural course. And that's actually the starting point most of the time, to talk about what's my culture. And it's funny how you said that, a lot of people didn't know what their culture was. And it's really true. When people are first asked this question, they don't know how to answer it. And this comes back to that famous book by Richard Lewis and Kai Hemmerich called Fish Can't See Water, because we don't know what we're in, because it's all around us. It's always been there, and it's the only one we know. And so we don't necessarily distinguish it as a culture. It's just the way it is. And but I think you probably had this experience in the first instance. This is the confused response you get, like strange things like, yeah, Sunday afternoon football and beer. But then once you start digging in, like once you start asking the question differently, then they start to go, oh yeah, it's about the way that we communicate. And they start saying things like, yeah, it's how we live our lives. And they start coming up with other answers. Like, good, yeah, that's right. Now you're on the right track. And then, maybe also through group discussion, probably you've found this when you do group courses, if you send them into small groups to discuss something with a little more specific question, then they start coming up with more concrete answers. And then oh yeah, and then they hear the other groups, the responses, so then they're like, oh yeah, you're right, that's right, we do that, we do think like that, we do eat like that, we do work like that, like, yeah, you're right. And then at the end you come up with suddenly like a long list, and then everybody can go, yeah, that's right. But in the beginning they're like, what? Yeah, what is culture? They don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Funny.
And I believe, from what I'm seeing, my observation, I mean, we are making big strides here in the United States, and things are evolving, and we are becoming more aware that there are other groups. We're more aware that those groups have their needs. We are starting to hear empathy a lot, mental health a lot, and and I say so often that when you break down the mental health, especially when it comes to businesses, big part of it has to do with culture. And I'm not going to dive into this, but I have a lot of stories to share just about that. And I tell people, listen, there's one aspect that you are overlooking that can solve a lot of your problems in here.
You're so right.
Okay.
You're so right.
And I tell you just briefly, because this is a big topic and we don't want to get into it, but I was talking to an engineer the other day, and she works with a large corporation, and she's been there for a long time. And I asked her about the work, how is it doing, how is it going, how is she doing, everything. And she was from Central America. Brilliant. Said, well, do you see your boss? Do they ever? No. So if leaders up there, managers, are not connecting with people, and just the fact that you approach them one day and say, hey, you acknowledge their holidays, you acknowledge their belief system, you acknowledge things like that, how would you want them to achieve at maximum level? they're just going to go there and collect a paycheck. And I said, hello, there's a huge a concept that if you just master a little bit of it, you can create a huge difference. But that's a whole nother subject. We're going to go back to you and what you do and all of that. And I know that you are in Italy, you're in America, you were born in the United States, now living in Italy, but you specialize in Saudi Arabia. I'd like you to say a little bit of your work, because I know the belief systems are absolutely, there's from Saudi Arabia to the United States, somewhere in the middle, there's Italy right there. This variation, I mean, culturally and within the belief system itself, there is a huge difference. So what made you specialize in Saudi Arabia?
Okay, that's a really good question. I actually specialize in like all the countries where I spent a lot of time. So Italy, US, of course, India, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia. Those are the countries where I lived for the most time, and I feel like I really know the culture. I've worked there, you know, where I was the only foreigner in the company, and, you know, in many situations. Why I decided to kind of focus on Saudi Arabia at this time is because there's quite a need and a demand for this kind of training. And there's a massive boom in their economy and society right now due to the Vision 2030, which you've probably heard is the initiative to, you know, diversify their economy away from dependence on oil revenues. So I happen to live in the kingdom in the year that the Vision 2030 came out in 2016 and until 2020. So I was there during, I mean, I witnessed a lot of this transformation. I was there when they had one of the first open air music concerts. So it was in January of 2018. I went to a Mariah Carey concert, believe it or not. It was amazing. I mean, to be, you know, part of history in the making. Plus, in 2018, it became legal for women to drive on my birthday, June 24th.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you were the one bringing all those changes.
Don't tell anybody. So, you know, I was there to witness a lot of this transformation. And I also have to say that, I mean, unfortunately, Saudi Arabia has some strange and negative image out there in the world, okay, in the media and the news and in people's minds as well. But I am working to, you know, bust all the myths about Saudi Arabia, because I, as a like Western woman who was alone, I went there not knowing anybody except for one person maybe, but I had an absolutely life-changing and amazing experience. I had some of the most amazing professional and personal experiences of my life. The best teaching experiences, the most amazing students, the great facilities, brand new and modern, wonderful colleagues, a wonderful workplace. And I'm so grateful. You have no idea how much Saudi Arabia has changed my life and how much I miss it. So, you know, I had such an amazing, warm welcome from Saudis that I can never forget. I mean, in the first week, they were calling me sister, okay?
Yeah.
And they were not just saying it. It was, I felt
they meant it.
They meant it. They meant it. So think about that. Saudi Arabia has this image in the world of being a closed, fundamentalist Islamic state. Okay, do you think that's a closed attitude for someone to call you sister? I mean, they didn't even know me. I'm a foreigner in their country, and they welcomed me by calling me sister, and not just calling me sister, but telling me, asking me every day, how are you doing? Are you settling in all right? Do you need anything? Here's my number. If ever you need help, any time of the day or night, you call me. And I was sure, luckily, I never needed any help, but I mean, like, I wasn't in any emergency. But
Uh-huh.
if I ever found myself in any difficult situation, they would definitely jump to the rescue without thinking about it any time of the day or night. I mean, at the end of my first like group of courses, it was just 3 months.
Uh-huh.
By the way, I was working at KAUST University, King
Uh-huh.
Abdullah University of Science and Technology, and it's on the Red Sea side, okay,
Mhm.
of the country. And so I had students means the staff of the university. I was not teaching the students of KAUST, I was teaching the staff at KAUST, but of course, they're students for me, trainees, I should call them. My trainees were mostly Saudi, but also from lots of different countries around the world and people of different careers. I mean, from everything from finance to security guards to, postdoc scientists. So I had a wide variety of students and a great experience. And I found that, I mean, it was so amazing teaching Saudi students. For example, you know how it's normal to put people into groups like and do competitions in the class just to
Mhm.
motivate
Mhm.
them. Saudi students never wanted to compete with each other. They wanted to help the other team get the answers, which I found so sweet because it was like, wait a minute, guys, if you know the answer, don't say it. And they're like, but teacher, they need help, which, it's so amazing. And then at the end of that first 3 months of courses, they gave me the most lavish gifts I ever got in my career. I mean, they brought things like a Nespresso machine, and we're talking like small groups of people, like 4 people in a class. One
Yeah.
class brought me an espresso machine. Another class brought me a set of rollerblades because I told them that I was missing my rollerblades. I didn't bring them with me, and the roads over there were so nice and
Uh-huh.
smooth and flat. So I really wanted to rollerblade. So they brought me a whole set of rollerblades with the helmet and the pads and everything. Just so generous. I could never forget this. And not only that, it was also about the opportunities and the flexible mindset. For example, I was hired as a business English instructor. That was my main job, like business English, presentation skills, a little bit of negotiation skills, and professional skills, let's say.
Uh-huh.
At a certain point, I was like, wait a minute, this is such a multicultural environment. We had more than 120 countries represented in the university campus.
Mhm.
And we had people coming from all over the world, many of them their first time abroad. So I said, hey, we need cross-cultural training. Of course, they weren't familiar with it, but they let me do it. They were open enough.
Yeah.
The Saudi, the head of HR, they were open enough to say, all right, go ahead, let's try this. Let's run a pilot. And I'm so grateful for that. Like, imagine the mindset, the flexibility of allowing a foreigner to come in and say, hey, this is something that may benefit you. Would you let me try it? And they said, yes. I mean, so amazing. Like, I can't be more grateful for that. I
Awesome.
also had so many other opportunities at KAUST. I mean, even after, let's say, 3 years of being in the training space, I was looking for something new, something more challenging, something different. And so the head of HR allowed me to move into a new role, which was a policy advisor role. And even though it sounds like it has nothing to do with
Uh-huh.
cultural training, actually, as a part of my job, I was still doing like the cultural orientations for new staff. And I was conducting mediations sometimes if there was a conflict between, two people in a team and they came to HR for help, I would sit down at a table with them and help them work out their issues. And that was probably the most amazing experience I had in Saudi Arabia, being a part of learning that because I had never really done that before. They trained me, I learned it, then I was doing it, and it's so incredible. Like, I'm so grateful to Saudi for these experiences.
I'm
So
glad.
naturally, yeah, actually, I didn't want to leave the job, to be honest with you. Why I left the job was because I got married in 2019, December, just before the pandemic started. And then in 2020, there was the pandemic and we weren't allowed to travel. The borders were closed of Saudi.
Yeah.
I was just married, but my husband was not in Saudi yet. So I was like, oh, I had to make a choice between love and my job. So I chose love. But luckily, I had an agreement with the university to continue providing training. So I still keep going back to KAUST and doing cross-cultural and other types of training, presentation skills,
Uh-huh.
managing difficult conversations at work, like lots of courses around communication skill, business writing as well. So I'm
Oh,
really grateful that, we kept that connection, and KAUST still has a very special place in my heart, and it's my home. It's one of my homes, and it will always be my home. And one of the great things about living in different countries is that you realize when it's really in your heart, when you start getting excited about the same things they get excited about. For example, when Saudi won against Argentina in
Argentina.
yeah, in the World Cup, I was there running a course at KAUST at the time, and I felt that rush of excitement and that adrenaline, like, yes, I want them to win. It was like I was a part of it.
Part of it. Yeah.
And I start to get offended at the same things they get offended at. So for example, now when people say negative things about Saudi, I get very emotional. I start shouting and defending them. No,
Yeah.
it's a wonderful culture. How dare you say that? You don't know anything. Sometimes
Well,
I can get really emotional because it makes me upset if people say things against a culture that is kind of a part of me now.
yeah.
It touches a bone inside of me that makes me feel, like I've been offended. So I have to defend it sometimes vehemently, no, it's not like
Yes.
that. Saudi has changed a lot. It's not what you think. It's not at all what you hear in the news. Unfortunately, a lot of the information out there is negative.
Yes.
It's outdated, and a lot of it is simply untrue. It's changing slowly but surely. The image is changing as people become more aware and they see what's going on over there. And even if you know people still have to respect that it's a different culture, and it
Yeah.
is what it is, and you have to love it for the people. You can't make a judgment on an entire population because of certain events that happened or certain things that a country's government has done. You can't make a judgment on an entire population because of that. You have to go there, live there,
Yeah.
meet the people, experience it on a daily basis. You will experience the best hospitality in the world, or one of the best. I'm sure it's also like that in Morocco. So I don't want to say the best, right? I mean, hospitality is, yeah, I mean,
Well, the saying goes, no one can beat the Arab hospitality. Okay.
right. That's for sure.
That's for sure. And
Yeah,
I see your passion. I can feel your emotions. And
right.
the only thing that we can do really, and if I sit here and tell my story, which I'm not going to say it today, maybe another day, the only thing that we can do is educate.
Absolutely.
The only thing we can do is share information of what we know to change, not only change, but open up minds and hearts for people to be
Hearts.
willing
That's
to
right.
experience it for themselves.
That's
And
right. It is about opening minds and hearts. That's a key thing, because you have to have your heart open. It's all about
yeah,
whether inside you're willing and ready to consider another viewpoint. I mean, people are pleasantly surprised when I tell them how it really is. And I've actually got some of my friends now interested in traveling there for tourism, because now there's a tourist visa. That's another thing that became
yes,
available during the years when it was in 2019, I think, when they launched that tourist visa.
yeah. Well, congratulations on your marriage, first of all. Okay,
Thank
that's
you.
that's awesome. Good news. And when you were speaking about lavish presents and gifts, uh, I can agree more, because I've worked with people from that region for quite a long time. As I was running my real estate company and business, I was very heavy on foreign investors, and a big chunk were from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, from expats in the UAE. So when we wanted to meet, I traveled to Dubai, and we all get together and meet there. And I can tell you, Cheryl, the gifts that I received, I mean, beyond imagination. Just the hospitality and kindness is very different, very unique and special.
Very unique. Yeah,
very unique and special, and it makes you want to do more for that region and for that entire chunk of the map that is so often misunderstood.
That's right. You're so right.
So luckily I do speak the language, and I feel at home when I am dealing with them, and I understand their needs, I understand their communication style, the way I understand the history, and this is huge when you're dealing with cultures. If you don't know history, sometimes people are hurting, and you know the culture. They're hurting, they're not comfortable about a topic, whatever. But if you do know the background, you know the historical facts on certain matters, you sympathize, you empathize more, and you understand them, and they open up to you. And that is so important. That is done very well with foreigners from pretty much every part of the world. And that's what really drove me into this field. I said, there's so much lacking. There's so much information and misinformation that people have. Because if you click on your television and you turn on that news channel, all you are going to hear is negative stuff.
You're so right.
So you have to experience it, and you have to be really aware that you are sold what they want you to believe in. And I'm not going to get into that. There are a lot of reasons.
You're so right. You're so right. Yes.
So we can talk all day.
Knowing the history.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Knowing the history is so important because it has shaped the culture of every place. And I'm still learning the history of the Middle East and Saudi. And you know, it's a process. It takes a long time. I'm also learning about the history of Italy still.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to learn, and it takes a lot of time, but you can understand more about the culture and the society when you connect to certain historical factors. And history shapes the way the society turns out. And it's important to know.
Yeah. Well, I can sit here and talk to you the whole day.
For ages.
Forever. You've been a wonderful guest. And I am so happy that we are here and connected and sharing our knowledge and wisdom with other people. Hopefully they can benefit. Now, where can people find you, Cheryl? Go ahead and tell them where they can find you. What can you help them with?
Well, they can always find me on my website, CherylObal.com. That's CherylObal.com. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn. And I have a YouTube channel that talks about expat life, intercultural skills, and doing business abroad. And if you're interested in becoming a cross-cultural trainer, I have the Cross-Cultural Trainers Network. That's for existing trainers and aspiring trainers who want to make a career out of it. And so I'm always happy to talk to people and provide whatever assistance and learning I can. I'm working with a lot of corporates these days in different parts of the world, a lot in Saudi, but also here in Europe and in India, in the UK, and in the US. So kind of all over the place, and mostly for sending staff to Saudi or sending staff to Italy or the US. This is where I can really be I can really add value to companies that are sending staff abroad.
Okay, excellent. So I believe that her website, the website is right on top,
Oh, yes, it's there.
www.cherylobal.com, right there. Contact her for your needs. With that, we conclude
Yes.
our today's session, and it has been pleasure. Until then, please stay safe, please stay connected, and
Definitely.
learn. Okay, thank you
Thank
so
you
very
so
much.
much. It's been a
Thank you.
delightful conversation, Mona. You are so animated and you have a personality. You should be a radio host.
Absolutely. Hopefully, we'll get to
You should
work
have your own
together.
radio show.
A radio.
Yes, that would be
Let's do
amazing.
our radio show. Why not?
A
Why not?
cultural radio show.
Cultural. We'll talk about that later. Have a
That's a great
wonderful
idea.
Friday. Have a
You
wonderful Friday,
too. Have
Cheryl.
a good
Have a great
weekend.
weekend.
Take care.
Thank you.